Hi, the following conversation is between me, Anthony Lawton, who works for Fit to Care, and Ollie Hart, who's a GP and a health coach. The purpose behind this was to glean more wisdom from each other through genuine dialogue, and I mean genuine in the sense of it's not about point scoring, it's about really understanding each other in a deeper way and bouncing off each other in a proper dialogue. I learned a lot from Ollie in this session. It was all around health coaching and whether my system can be improved. And I certainly feel like from this discussion with Ollie that it can. Ollie made me, through his participatory knowledge of harder to reach and more deprived and disadvantaged groups, that what I need to do with my sort of change management system is recognise that some cohorts are more difficult to reach to start on this journey of change, and that you have to constantly be aware of. You need to meet people where they're at. So I hope Ollie appreciated a bit more my model and how flexible and bespoke it can be to individuals. But I certainly learned a lot from him as well. So let me know if you think it's a great conversation. I think it is. I think this is the sort of conversation that we all need to have a lot more, less about point scoring, more about shared wisdom. Let me know what you think. Thank you. So I really appreciate the time, Ollie, because I sent you the book, the Fit to Care book. And the reason I did it, because I know all your GP by background, but I know you've got a lot of health coaching experience as well. Yeah. And part of the book, I'm coming at it from a different angle probably, but that's what this call's about, is to explore.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Exactly.
See where the synergies are. But I was coming at it from I've studied a lot of cognitive science, especially Professor John Vervaeke's work and BJ Fogg as well. He's from Stanford, PhD from Stanford. So I've ingrained myself with all that work. And I know you're familiar with BJ Fogg. But my ambition was to try and take all their years of knowledge and study and expertise and try and bring it into a space that would be easier for a lot of non-academics and health professionals to just plug into without having to do all those years of research, and hopefully something that you can tangibly do really quickly and really easily.
Yeah.
And then you responded and said, "Oh, I'm not sure about it." So that's just prompted this call, just so that we can just lay it all out and see if there are synergies, or to see if my book is that section of my book is complete rubbish. So it's just, that's the sort of call. It's just open and honest and just see where the synergies are.
Sure, and forgive me. My view is just one view, and the book is a tremendous achievement. It's a huge collection of research and opinions and views, and beautifully put out. And I love the fact that it's directed towards sort of nursing staff, because very often things aren't. They're either directed to the public for mass sales, or they're to the medical market, or they're sort of like trying to sort of be I don't know, just sort of something for everybody. But actually, I think nursing staff often get really missed. I think that's great.
No, that's good. That's good. In some ways, it was just cathartic, just to try and get, I guess, arguably 30 years worth of experience, all these things that you learn, and just think, right, let's try and write a book and get all this down on paper. And then I utilize the nurses to emphasize the points that I feel really deeply. And it could have been that the nurse interviews came out with something completely different, but they didn't. They completely compounded my passion around care of staff, well-being. You look after people, and the results are massively better, as opposed to top-down command and control management. It needs to be bottom-up empowerment, and that's been my view. And interviewing those 20 nurses really brought that out and made me think that this is the truth. This is not just me thinking this stuff.
So I was intrigued. So did you have an idea that you wanted to write something for nurses and then seek out nursing views, or did you do those interviews and then decide I must do this for nurses? How did that come about?
I think all that, just when you decide to write the book, then you have to really start doing some work, because yes, you've got all that background knowledge and all that study that you've done, but actually when you try and think about how do I put that together, it's hard. The hardest bit is just structuring it and getting the information that you want to come across, and how do you structure that. So I was doing that, and then I was realizing that another big belief of mine is that bottom up, the knowledge from that ground is absolutely the key. And then you start researching, and you realize that nurses are the vast majority, well, not the vast majority, but the majority of staff in the NHS.
Yes.
And then you realize that they also are the closest to the patient. They spend the most time and have the most access and are the closest to understand the patient. You put those two together and you realize that they are absolutely critical to if we want reform, they have to be, in my mind, the number one angle of change. So that's how that came about. So I knew then at that point, well, I really do need to label that point and really get their point of view for the foundation for all the other stuff. Really, that's how I pulled it together.
That's great. I love hearing that. I was hoping you were going to say that, really, because it's funny in a way, having had a journey myself as being a GP and being trained as a medic, and you know, you come into the kind of NHS, the healthcare landscape, as quite a sort of privileged and quite ego-driven professional, I think, as a medic, because you've been sort of raised on this pedestal. You've been told that you're the sort of creme de la creme to some degree, getting into medical school, and then you know, when you arrive, you know, doctors are sort of in this kind of like, you know, elevated position where you know, you even as a junior, you get to sort of like make a lot of decisions. You can prescribe, or other people can't, that sort of thing. And I think that, you know, that it's what I've learned actually is that, you know, that in doing that, you miss all the compassion and the caring aspect that is the bulk of what nurses do. And it's just been such an interesting arc for myself, and you reflecting on what you're doing, that you know, actually it's only as you get a bit more mature and wiser perhaps that you realize it's not about the cleverness and someone telling you what to do. It's around that culture of compassion and care that makes everything.
No, absolutely. And the book, the nurse interviews brought out for me more than I'd had before, this point of over medicalization, and almost, you know, the real skills and experience that nurses bring, if they're allowed to, if it's managed properly, is unbelievably powerful. So it's, the example that really sticks with me was, if you're not careful, a patient gets a temperature and it's straight onto the medical route of antibiotics and all sorts of stuff. Whereas a good nurse allowed to do what she should do is to say, actually, you've got 13 blankets on, you've not drunk anything all day, it's 35 degrees in this room. Let's take some of these blankets off you. Let's open a window and get some fresh air. Let's make sure you have a good drink. Let's get you up and have a little walk around. And then let's see after that if you've still got a high temperature, or if in half an hour it's come back down. And it's that sort of, I know it's a stupid, simple example.
No, I completely hear what you're saying. And you can extend that, can't you, into listening to people's preferences and what they're, you know, sort of like, we assume, don't we, that everybody wants longevity, safety, minimum risk, but actually you counterbalance that with, you know, autonomy, control, choice, you know, being the one deciding about your own destiny. That those things actually really matter to people, and often it's the nursing staff who are sitting with people, holding their hands, hearing them out day and night, that understand that much better than anybody else.
Massively powerful, which that takes me to the work years ago I did with Right Care, where we researched again this medicalization route of automatically clinicians potentially feeding people down a route because they just think that's the right way to go without that proper shared decision make. So an example that stuck with me was knee operations. So if you really talk that through and go, gardening's your number one thing. Now this operation might be good for this, and this, but the chances are you might be worse through having this knee operation. You might be able to do less gardening if you have that. And that bit of the conversation doesn't come across, because automatically clinicians are in, I think this is the best for you. Let's get on and do it.
Well, that's you know, Alf Collins and Angela Coulter and Al Mully, all their work, isn't it, has shown that people tend to choose less interventions when they're given a proper shared decision and weighed up pros and cons, and you know, what it'll do and what it won't do. And it, very interestingly, I think medical professionals choose much less intervention for themselves than they choose for them, than they might direct for their patients, which is interesting, isn't it? Because, like, you know, when you know all the risks from the inside, you sort of decide, oh, actually, I think I'll chance it out, and I think I'll put a bit more effort into looking after myself and rehabbing myself, as opposed to having an external intervention.
And then from there, I think the book for me is, what I hope I'm trying to get across is this factor of, and I really believe it is like a universal truth, and we're sort of touching on it there, but if you can get this the right stuff done right first time.
Mm.
And a lot of that can be powered from nurses if we allow them to have that role. The reduction of waste in the system when we get it right first time is incredible. Because and a bit of lingo, but failure demand that happens as a result of us not doing it right first time, not listening to the patient right first time, etc., that there's so much waste in the system that just creates so much stress for everybody.
Oh, I'm familiar with John Seddon's work and failure demand. Don't worry. I'm a big fan. I mean, but the other, when I've been thinking about that, I'm also think there's a counterbalance to that as well, which I've always termed passivity demand. So there's failure demand. There's also passivity demand, which we get by doing too much for people. And I know John's work was all around getting it right first time and sort of doing the right thing for people. But I think we've also got to be mindful that in doing anything for anybody, there is always a risk that we undermine their ability to do it for themselves. And obviously, in an emergency or a crisis, you have to do that. Of course you do, and it's the right thing to do. That's a mental health a crisis, a physical crisis, an accident emergency. But most of the time, it's not. And we've got to really weigh up. If we do something, even if we do it really well, we're not failing them, we're doing it really well, we can undermine their own ability to have the chance to find their own solutions and to learn how to do it themselves. So I would call that passivity demand, because the next time around is people just learn, oh, I just listen to the doctor, or I just take instructions from my online digital app, whatever it is,
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is off topic a little bit, but it ties in. I wish I'd have read this book. I'm just reviewing a book for a guy called Chris Cooper, who's another lean guru, bit of a similar sort of experienced guy to John Seddon. And he talks about light matter and dark matter. So fundamentally, if we're looking at what is the value, so in our context, it would be the patient, and then constantly look for what is the light value. So he does a great analogy of the NHS is a little bit like a theme park at the moment. So you queue up for 3 hours for a ride, and then you have 2 minutes of great experience, and then you queue up for another 2 hours, and you have 5 minutes of great experience. And the NHS is a bit like that. Now, the 2 minutes and the 5 minutes is light matter. That's genuinely great. But the 2 hours and the 3 hours is dark matter. And it becomes a really interesting way of looking at flows, pathway flows. So in your passivity example, I would just see that as dark matter. On the face of it, it's light matter, but actually it's dark matter, because we are not doing the best for the patient.
The wrong way. It's a really interesting. I mean, there's no wrong or right, is there? And it's a mixture. Do you know what I mean? And it is around, I think, just having the skills. And you mentioned the word permission earlier on, the permission to be able to use your professional judgment, and also to be able to work collaboratively with the patient. That sort of shared decision approach, and giving people time and space to hear them out is often squeezed out, isn't it? But it is actually what creates the best value and care in the end.
Yeah. And on that matter, I think it's moving away from top-down command and control and targets and checklists. I know checklists can be useful. On the whole, I think we've got to trust. We've got to make sure they're well trained, give them the trust to get on and do a good job, and give them that autonomy to do the right job. So, back to the nurse, taking the blankets off, etc., before going down the antibiotics route.
I
think that's really key. The big part of my book, which is I'm really keen to know this is one of the reasons that sparked me to do it, which is the Vervaeke stuff, is the section 3 on the cognitive science, and how much information. So this is the combinator explosion. So the combinator explosion bit actually changed my life when I heard his lecture on this. And this is the chessboard example, where on one game of chess, there's more potential legal moves than there are particles in the universe. Absolutely blew my mind, that stat.
Wow.
And then I link that into, and there's only 32 agents, and each agent on a chessboard, a piece, if you like, each one of those has only got half a dozen rules around it. But just that factored up from a mathematical perspective gives you that more legal moves than particles in the universe.
Wow.
So when you really get that, you can look at that in the real world and go, picture a nurse with a ward of 12 patients, and every patient has got different condition, different symptoms, different allergies, different drugs, different preferences, different family members. It's combinatory explosion in terms of the potential things that they're dealing with. It's astronomical. So to think that you can manage that well on a simple checklist is insane.
Completely. And in that, we undervalue the power of the human brain, don't we? I mean, like, the brain is incredibly sophisticated, isn't it? And we use things like gut instinct and pattern recognition. And I know you talk about biases and heuristics and watching out for those, but in some ways, we undervalue the quality of the human brain as well, don't we? By
Yeah,
not allowing people to use their judgment, and
yeah,
to use their instinct, because it's not always going to be right. And I guess we can enhance that with machine learning and artificial intelligence to support us. But equally, we can't just marginalize the value of the human brain and the incredible sort of skill and depth and nuances we have that we're just not even aware, are we? The body language we pick up
yeah,
on, the verbal cues we pick up on, the things that we're processing every millisecond.
yeah,
I still think we haven't got computers that are anywhere near that.
yeah. No, absolutely. And that section 3 is unpicking that and essentially saying our brain's amazing and it can cope with that massive combinatorial explosion by using heuristics.
Yes.
And in this scenario, that is the best solution. And in this scenario, that's the best solution. And it's brilliant.
Yeah.
If we're on top of that, if we're aware that actually that heuristic can sometimes be wrong. So just be aware that might be wrong. Be open to challenge and being open to being curious to see if that's wrong. That sort of the nine dots experiment is brilliant at highlighting that scenario where we think we know the answer, but we don't. Yes. Because we're stuck in a box that we've had from childhood.
Yes.
So if we can combine those two bits of knowledge, we just become almost superhuman then, I think, and work with each other to help break each other's brains when it's in the wrong context.
Well, I mean, and you network human minds together, you connect them, in a sort of mutual respect and mutual trust, you get an escalation of that power, don't you?
So then I guess I'm just thinking through the book in sections, and then we get into the section 4 where I thought could be helpful for health coaching. So I'll just give you a bit more background to this so it can flow.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is taken from BJ Fogg's experience. Now I'm trying to refine it and restructure it so it's more amenable to our world and arguably a bit less academic.
Yeah.
But the big thing for me, which I think is different, is Vervaeke and Frankl for me are almost the be all and end all. So I think that meaning and purpose is the key to happiness, but it's also the key to productivity and well-being. So my start point for any change is, and I think this ties in with Cooper's work as well, do we know what we're trying to do? Do we know what the value is? So in our case, we'd say the patient. So do we genuinely, authentically all work together to serve that patient? And that's the start point for me. So at the moment, I would argue that we are too driven by our silos and our command and control structures and our checklists and our KPIs and our 4-hour targets and such like. And we've lost that connection to the patient.
Yeah.
So that's a big, big, big starting point. But if we genuinely feel that and understand it, and as a team, that is it, all sorts of things start to change. So as an example, working with Carrie Goucher on some work recently, and she put a post out on LinkedIn recently saying the conflict within teams and such like can be problematic, and this is how we might need to manage it. I would say, actually, if we as a team really genuinely feel that the patient is the key, and it's not about me, it's not about my ego, and it's not about you, and it's not about your ego. We come to serve the patient, and it's like you come to that meeting with a better idea than mine, and I'm brilliantly excited that yours is better than mine. It's a different world. It's just completely different, and that's how I genuinely see stuff. And when I look at work, I'm really excited about somebody coming up with a better idea.
Yeah,
so that's the start, and then it flows through sort of a more of a Fogg methodology of that change and a structured way, a very practical and structured way for you to really change your behaviors.
Yes.
So an example for me. So I'll tell you my example, and I used the book. So I did the book, tweaked it, brought all these things into account, hopefully the best I could, and then sort of said to myself, well, let's see if I can do it. So I said to my wife, what thing, obviously thinking I'm perfect, Anthony Poppins, practically perfect in every way. I couldn't think that she would have anything to complain about. I said, what would you want me to change? And she said, I hate when you bite your nails. So she'd mentioned it before, but I never thought it was a hate thing. I always thought it was a bit of a, that's annoying as opposed to hate, but she hates it.
Yeah.
So I've done that consistently for way over 45 years and just went through the process. And I'm not lying. I'm, God strike me down. Within a week, I'm no longer a nail biter. I don't bite nails. So my identity has changed. So before I was definitely a nail biter.
Yeah.
And the process, the practical process of going through it practically changes you. It does, and it's really quite easy to do.
Yeah.
So the book example is sleep, but you can pretty much use it for anything, is my argument. But this is the bit we really wanted to talk about in the first place. So
yeah, well, it's interesting because I think I'm not disagreeing with you at all, and I think my challenge to you on it is that that's a methodology that probably works really well for a lot of people. And you look at professors like BJ Fogg and the sort of like the researchers, they've asked a lot of people, and they tried to sort of like identify the things that are common for a lot of us. But if you take a step back, if you're really taking that genuine coaching approach, you've got to ask, even before this, so you use the idea of meaning being, you think, the central thing. You've got to work out, is meaning the central thing for that person? It might be, but it might not be at that time, because they might not have enough mental space or be in the right place to consider what's meaning for them at the moment. So I'm sort of with you. I love the way you're taking away from a sort of like didactic sort of telling way, and you're finding out. But my only sort of like challenge back to you, and it's very difficult in a book, because as soon as you're using a book, you're writing up a methodology. It's more about the overall approach to it, and I agree with you with that, but it's not about having a sort of discrete system. And I think people like to write about a system because you can put your name on it, you can put it on paper, and you can say, well, follow that system and good results will happen. And for some people it will. For you as a sort of highly thinking, sort of white middle-aged male, do you know what I mean, with all the sort of other resources you have, it worked perfectly for you. But it might not work for an Afro-Caribbean single parent who's living downtown Detroit and suffering domestic abuse. Do you know what I mean? So it's sort of like, I guess for me,
I'd love to. We might need to take this off and actually do some experimentation with some of your challenging patients that you're trying to support. Because and this is back to the foundational universal truth stuff. I guess it's almost a belief, is that I think we've got to go down to that level, so that when things are challenging, you bring it back and you go, because we've been doing something for 45 years, or it's so ingrained, our neurons are so on a track, it's very hard to change stuff, which is why this sort of thing is important, I guess. But if you can, in those moments of this is difficult, if you can tie that back to why are you doing this? So my example when I did it personally was, what's most important to me? And it was wife, children, and I want to make a difference in the NHS, and I want them to do a difference on the environment. I want to leave this world having done those things. It's almost the walking on hot coals things. And then that sort of drives everything then. So when we're going through this process and it's linked to that, it's, why do you want to get more sleep? It's so I can serve my family better. It's so I can make more progress and make a more difference to the NHS. And you tie it back, and it's back to the biting nails thing. Why do you want to stop biting your nails? When you're in that process of going like that, you can make that connection back to, I do not want to annoy my wife all the time. And then it becomes that change process. It's just like a system of linking that back, just the cognitive science stuff. And then there's other tips as well.
And I can totally see it. And I'm not denying that it's really, really useful. I just, my perspective on it is that people are starting further upstream of that. So if your self-esteem is so low, if you think that you're a piece of shit, you're not even going to think that you're valuable. It's not even worth you thinking about what has meaning to you, because because you're not even in that.
That's the little bit I'd love to dig into. So just picture a fictitious person that you've sort of helped in the past that's really low. I suspect there's definitely always a connection to another human being or something that they feel is great. And then all it takes is a little step towards a contribution towards that thing that they feel is important or powerful or meaningful. And that can take them on a journey to change your identity from that person that's worthless. Tiny steps, one step at a time, that we then celebrate. You've done a tiny thing. Let's say you're massively obese, right? And you're suicidal because of it, etc., etc. But actually your young child, you love to bits. Just taking a step, a walk out to the gate and back, is a contribution towards you serving that child in a much better way, because you're on a journey of helping that child. Sure. And then before you know it, you're doing a miles walk. Before you know it, we've got you on the 5K, Sunday park run or whatever, and your identity's changed. You're not a fat, obese, worthless person. You're somebody that's actually doing something and contributing and making a difference. And I mean, I am not a health coach, so this is just my ambition, if you like.
Well, I think what you're again, there's no one size fits all here. Do you know what I mean? I think what you're describing is something that a lot of coaches would use as a technique. And I think, what matters to you most, what has meaning, what chimes with your identity, all these things are really important. I think really root down values for people, and they're excellent levers for change and for reinforcing new habits and, redefining yourself, which is important if you're going to change something, right? It's really important. I think it's where you will often want to go with people, but I think there's a bigger piece around preparing people and getting people ready for that and getting people receptive to it and so on. So I'm not saying it's not right at all. I'm saying, a lot of the times it'll be absolutely what you want to do. I'd say it's probably part of the picture. The difference is maybe I think I hear you saying that maybe, well, actually it's so fundamental. It's so important that if you can just connect people to that connection to that way of thinking will be so inspirational and so transformative that it will be compelling, and it will open the curtains and so on. I think that's what you're saying.
A lot of what I'm doing and what I see as a key thing is, and this is the cognitive science stuff, is that our neurons and our neural pathways are so fixed that the only way you're going to change that is if you have a mini eureka moment where you see something differently and the neurons connect to a different set of neurons, where you see an opening. So a bit like the 9-dot problem. You can't see the problem at all, and then somebody just tells you that, I won't spoil the book, but instantly you go, oh my God. Right. Now that hasn't changed your neural pathways. Those thick, deep pathways are still there, but you've just opened the door to doing something differently and looking at something differently. And then it's up to us that are trying to support change to fertilize that seed, if you like. There's been a seed planted on a different route, and then we need to support people to fertilize that different route until it's not a seed, it's a proper plant that lives on its own right, if you like. It's sustainable. So I see that in everything that we do. It's about breaking a frame, giving somebody a seed of change, and then supporting that change so that new pathway becomes the new pathway. I don't bite my nails now. So I always see that eureka moment as the spark. Now I could see that you as a health coach could have like 50 ways of creating that spark. It's not just about saying, my example is, think about what's most important to you, and then it's my wife and it's my family and it's the environment, and then the next question is, okay, so what are you doing about it? So for a normal, stable person, white, middle class, privileged person, that's probably enough. But for somebody that's in a real state, you might need a whole host of work before we can get to that bit, maybe.
Exactly. And I think it makes me think of the kind of, we often talk about biopsychosocial things, and I think your neuron example is a really good one, that actually kind of on a thinking level, the way our neurons are firing is really important, deterministic of our outcome. But if you think our neurons are bathed in a sort of metabolic environment, do you know what I mean? And if you're very metabolically unwell, if your diet's really poor, if you're bathed in adrenaline and stress and so on, those neurons are just not going to fire so well, because they're in a very unfavorable environment. No matter how good you are at making those, challenging those connections, it's not going to happen, because it's just a very unfavorable environment. I think was it Maya Angelou that talked about even the strongest seed, you put it in a toxic soil, it's not going to grow.
Yes.
You know? So so there's a sort of like the the metabolic, the sort of conditions the brain's in, but then there's also your social context as well, which sort of like has an influence, I think, on the way our behaviors. So our sort of neurons, absolutely, in the end we're trying to influence our neurons, but they're in a sort of like a bigger picture.
Yeah, you've just
I think we have to
sparked a
consider.
bit of a link for me, a bit of another eureka moment for me, which is my vision of this is link it to yours in a clever way, so that you use these sort of tools and techniques to, and I'd use this in a change program in an organization to say, let's take the toxicity away first, or let's take the the dark matter away first, which puts you in a much better environment to be able to see things more clearly and operate more effectively and be just less chaotic, because everything's clearer, you get more sleep, your food's better. So with that sort of eureka moment for me, I would use this approach to say, well, let's start on something like getting better sleep, because you get more sleep, you will feel a hell of a lot better. Day one, that's the start point.
Yeah.
And we'd start with something really simple like that. The equivalent in a work environment would be, let's find all those reports that you're doing that take one day of your week that nobody ever reads. That's the equivalent of that low-hanging fruit almost. Take that dark matter, that toxicity that creates a whole lot of stress unnecessarily. Fix that first, and then we can get more complicated. But I guess the same could apply to a personal, chaotic home life, couldn't it?
Absolutely. And I suppose the sort of principles of coaching is that you're helping people to identify what their own dark matter is, and you're trying to skill them up to feel like they've got more agency to be able to deal with it. Recognizing that some stuff is really tough, isn't it? If you find yourself in a dire financial situation, you've had a gambling habit and you're massively in debt and under pressure to sort of debt collectors, or you're in an abusive relationship, or you've got dependents that are dying and you're having to look after them. I mean, some of this stuff isn't necessarily within our locus of control, but it's important, and it influences us. So we want to build people's agency and their capability. And I like your language about this sort of dark matter, that it's helpful to identify your dark matter and to look at what you can do about it, but it's also helpful to acknowledge that you'll be more capable of doing that at different times of your life through no fault of your own.
That feels really good.
Why do you say that, Anthony?
I just think we've connected your initial thoughts around, you've got to be careful with the system. I can sort of see that, but I can see a way of bringing those two thought processes together and being smart and saying, in certain bespoke situations, it's a bit like the point I was making earlier on. One heuristic on its own that can work 90% of the time can be wrong 10% of the time, and it's understanding when to use it in the right place, in the right context.
Absolutely.
And I think the coaching skills come in around, we've got a long journey to go on here to move from an absolutely chaotic place to a place where you've got agency and you live in a healthy life and a productive life and you're serving your purpose. That's a long journey. And there's all sorts of potential heuristics that we need to use in different places for different people at different times. But I don't know, but I certainly feel that the sort of, I'll call it system for argument's sake, could work for somebody in a chaotic place. I really think it could, because we could tie it down to something, the most basic thing that you think as a coach for this very, very chaotic person. It could work for that very, very basic thing, which could be just putting your shoes on.
Yeah, I mean that I've been in sort of infused and sort of like inspired by what's happened with the person-centered care movement in the personalized care movement in the last 5 years in the NHS. Led mostly by Al Collins and James Sanderson at the personalized care team, where they were trying to build this new insight into the way the NHS works. I think so bringing in new roles, not only health coaches, but social prescribing link workers who were kind of looking at people's wider sort of social context, and then care coordinators that help people to make sense of really complex situations where perhaps people just need that emotional and sort of like psychological support just to sort of deal with the complexity. But the focus of all of it is that it's not about us, it's about them. And I think that's the dilemma for any of us thinking about this, you know. So it's interesting when you sort of say, oh, that's really, I really can see how that connects. That's wonderful. But at the end of the day, it's not about my brain or your brain. It's about the brain, the people that we're seeking to kind of stimulate a useful change in, you know. So whether that's teaching nurses and helping them to see stuff that could have value and feel confident spending their time with that in the way they practice, or whether it's patients and helping them to connect with things that will be more useful. Yeah, and I guess the bottom line is that we're trying to stimulate conditions that will be the most advantageous for people in a massive range of possibilities. If there's that many moves on a chessboard with 32 pieces, like you say, you know, there's going to be just infinite combination of things that people can do, and we're just trying to create that fertile soil and the conditions where those infinite number of moves could be a little bit more advantageous for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you got into the detail of that section, but I definitely see it as that approach, which is you've got underlying principles, but within each one of those principles, the steps, it's absolutely bespoke to you.
Yeah.
So the sleep example, it sort of just practically breaks it down and says, these are all the things that you could do.
Yeah.
And now option number 3 might be perfect for you, but option number 5 might be perfect for you, and option number 1 might be perfect for you. And that sort of structure just draws it to you. It's about you, and it's the thing that's going to work for you. So I think coaching is perfect for that, and all the way through it's that.
Well, sorry, go on.
And then the extra little bit is just then the other tip, the cognitive tips and tricks. So if we looked at a nurse, for example, so some of the nursing quotes that I got from the interviews were, I'll get to the car park and I'll have a feeling of absolute dread, almost like tears, I can't get out of the car type feeling. And then we'll pick up on a whole host of these things, and it'll be things like, I never get to drink anything when I'm at work, and I never get to go to the toilet because I'm never drinking anything. You know, and all these things that dark matter, because it ends up coming back to bite you, because there's more failure demand when you're getting these things wrong. So people will get UTIs and overworked and stressed and off work, and also so we can use these tips and techniques to go, well, we know that you always wash your hands after you've dealt with a patient. That's already baked in. So we'll set up, the team can set up a drinks portal or whatever they're called next to the tap where you wash your hands. So we all start to ingrain into ourselves that every time we wash our hands, we have a little drink. And we look after each other and check that we've been to the loo and that we've had time to have lunch, and we can build those things in. So it's the same system that we could use for my nails scenario, but also we can use it for those practical things at work around, we make sure that you're going to have a drink, because we know that's absolutely fundamental to the whole system. No, I like that style of thinking, and it's interesting to chat back and forth with you, isn't it? Because there isn't a right or wrong in it. I think the thing we have to just guard ourselves with is making sure that we're not in any way limiting the range of choices, because you can assume you're giving people a choice by saying, you know, do you want to go and watch Chelsea play, Manchester United play, or kind of Wimbledon play? Do you know what I mean? And you know, you give them someone a choice, but they may not want to go and watch football, you know. So it's like sort of, you know, how far back do we come where we capture the whole range of what's going to be valuable for that person? And I think that is a real skill. And you know, it's really hard to write it into a book as well, because to me it's not about what's really hard is we work well with examples and real life things, don't we? So take it into our health coach training and our courses, we'll often teach people a specific way of working. But when we're teaching them it, we tell them that we don't want you to just
use this method. We're teaching a method because we know sometimes it can be easier to just have a process, follow it, because it illustrates a range of kind of concepts. But then we come back to it and go, well, actually, there's a whole load of other ways you could do that. But the common concepts that we're trying to do are the things we want you to draw out of it, so that your the general principles, the general approach of patient in control, them having autonomy, them having choice, is what you're trying to do. But there's a number of ways that you can do that. And if you're really skilled, you're able to sort of really flex the way you support people and pivot around those things you think are most useful at that time.
Yeah, different language, all those skills.
Exactly. How broad can you be? You could think about coaching, but actually what a lot of our health coaches are saying locally is there's no chance to coach until someone feels comfortable about their social situation. So a lot of them are sort of almost working in partnership with social prescribers or some of the DWP or work well advisors, whatever it is that's kind of needed to perhaps help their social situation recover a bit. And then they can do the behavior change bits around the neurons and because they're feeling a little bit more security, and their soil is a little bit more fertile. So the system as a whole has to be able to be sophisticated enough to kind of deal with the richness of human experience.
Yes.
That probably sounds a bit bullshitty saying that. It's just what came to my mind as I'm saying.
No, I agree. I absolutely agree. And I guess I'm just looking at what I've done in the book, similar to, you'd say, your teacher system. You've got a bunch of heuristics that you already use. And for me, I've just created my own one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the conversation started because I threw back a sort of challenge to it, didn't I? And it's almost an inevitable challenge. Like I say, I love what you've done with the book. You've had, but it's almost an impossible task to put into writing a system for coaching, because it's not necessarily a discrete system. It's a whole range of approaches and concepts and principles. And so maybe all it needs is sort of say, I'm going to take you through a type of system, an example of it, which will definitely work for a large number of people, but it might not work for everybody. But what it will do is it will illustrate such a different way of doing this that hopefully it will open your imagination. Do you know what I mean? I would preface it a bit, Anthony.
Yes. Yeah. That's the skill of a coach, isn't it? It's being able to communicate, to generate that first spark, that eureka moment of, okay, there is a different way to do this, and then take them on that journey.
Well, when we're teaching coaching again, we where we've just got up to, in probably in 5 years' time, I'll look at this and cringe probably, but we talk about the 3 C's of sort of connecting, contracting, and coaching. And those first 2 are really important, because if you haven't got a rapport and a connection, people probably won't open up or feel comfortable being honest with you, or that psychological sort of safety. But then the contracting bit is around agreeing what's important to work on at that time. And I think that's so crucial, because in order to do that, you have to find out where they're at, what's important, what their limitations are, where they're prepared to go.
Actually, it feels like your 3rd C is where in my brain that my model fits in. But actually, you still do need those first 2 C's before you can get to that bit.
Well, absolutely. So you sort of you contract around something that, and often it'll change, won't it? Often people will check you out as a coach, and so I'm prepared to work on, I don't know, thinking about my sort of, it's like a really simple thing, about stopping smoking or stopping biting nails. Like you said, I'm prepared to think about that because it's a really important thing. It's really pissing my wife off. I'm prepared to go there and I work on it. And then they test you out, and okay, that kind of worked, right? Actually, what I'm really sort of worried about is my sort of my self-esteem, and actually I'm worried that I might be gay, and that sort of actually I wanted to just have time to explore that emotionally and mentally. And do you know what I mean? You might go to a topic that's much more deep and meaningful, or I've got a pornography addiction, or whatever it is, something that you wouldn't be. Can we recontract? 'Cause now I trust you. I am actually prepared to go a lot deeper.
My vision in the book is do something to start with that's personal, like a nail biting or a sleep thing. So you understand it, you've got familiar with it, it's close to you, so it's worthwhile. And then when you've understood it, you can do it at work, and it's not one thing. You can do multiple at the same time. It doesn't have to be just a one-off thing. But go on that journey.
Yeah, I can see it.
I'd love to be a health coach and sit down with somebody like one of these really challenging ones and just work out with them. Maybe I should change profession.
Yeah. Well, I mean, wouldn't it be great if our society approach was a little bit more coaching orientated? You know, I guess that's probably what's motivated Tim and I to dedicate so much of our career to it, really, because, you know, there's a power, isn't there, in all of us treating each other with the respect of like, well, I'm not going to barge in and try and tell you what to do or sort of like give you my views. I'm going to, if I really genuinely want to support you or encourage you, I'm going to give space to hear you out and to sort of help you to kind of be more confident to talk about your stuff. You know, and if we were all interacting with each other like that, it'd be great, wouldn't it? You know, because we'd all get the chance to talk about our stuff and to sort of think it through, and then we would also give other people the time. Sometimes we'd take turns with it.
Yeah. Just finally, because I'm taking up too much of your time, this ties me back to the getting it right first time stuff and what you just said. I interviewed Professor Toby Lowe on the human learning system work. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
I did. I think I saw that recording, but it remind me because it was really interesting. Yeah,
he's brilliant. He's really, really good. But they've got examples. I think there's about 80 organizations around the world now that are following this concept as human learning systems. And there's a lot of crossover with my work and with Chris Cooper's work, but it's fundamentally getting things right first time. But they've got a case study. It's a made up name, but it's a real case study where, let's call him Jack for argument's sake. Jack was normal fella, train driver, life was normal, wife, children, house, good life. Somebody jumped in front of his train and really devastated him, really impacted him badly. Alcohol, lost his relationship, lost his house. They tracked every single transaction of him in terms of interactions with the social services and the council and the NHS. And he was up to £2 million, just under £2 million worth of interactions and costs with the social services and council and NHS.
Yeah.
And they basically just went into proper counselling, coaching mode. And he's now working as a counsellor himself.
Yeah.
He's now gone from 2 million over nearly 10 years down to £2,000 a year support costs.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between getting it right first time and actually listening to somebody and actually taking care of them, and not the command and control structure of everybody does this. You go to that one, you go to that one, you get signposted all around the place. Nobody really knows what you need and what you want. As soon as somebody properly listens to you and helps you properly, it's just a completely different world.
It's such a dilemma, isn't it? It's such a dilemma, isn't it? Because it takes time to do that, doesn't it? And when we're time poor, we're trying to strip time out. But it's just like in doing that, we're just creating the environment that's going to be so much more costly and time demanding later on, aren't we? So it's just having the foresight.
The time that he's been in the system for that £2 million is unbelievable. It will be something like 0.3% of the time that it's took to actually do it properly. Yeah.
And of course, now the NHS is so stretched, we haven't got time to make that time, have we? So it's like, how do you break that cycle? It's really delicate, isn't it? It really is delicate. And I mean, I love the work you're doing, Anthony. I love the fact that people are talking about this. And, you know, I think the health coaching thing can be a win-win, really, because in giving people time and seeing them starting to flourish, the returns are actually quite quick. So although there is a bit of upfront investment, you build a resource by people who now have, you know, sort of like skills themselves and often want to give back. So I think we've got to stretch our time horizon a bit, but plan in a recovery strategy with this. I think, you know, that might take us 3 or 4 years, maybe less than one parliamentary cycle. I really hope that the vision of the NHS is a bit different, that what we're building back in is compassion and time. But with that, we encourage people to feed in themselves and to join in. It's not a service that's done to people. It's a way of creating a culture between ourselves, which asks things of people as well. You know, that's valid. You know, if we're going to give, we've got to ask as well, I think.
Yeah. Back to that light matter. And is it genuinely light matter?
Yeah, I think this. Yeah, exactly. We yeah, people can contribute lots. There's lots of light matter to be contributed from lots of different places, and it doesn't just come from a caregiver. You know, it can come from each other.
Thanks ever so much. I really enjoyed it. It's a bit ad hoc, not shaved, no gel on the hair, but I really enjoyed it. We could slot this in.
Well, you can't tell. I don't think it comes across on the screen. Don't worry. I think, at the moment, because the trouble is with these things, you do get these very polished sort of expert patients, and they do want to talk a lot, and it's the same. But sometimes it's quite nice to get someone who's just been on a journey just recently. But the guy I was thinking of is a bit sick at the moment and can't do it. So that I've got two people who I hope will be great. They're a bit older and they've been in the peer support role for a while. They know how to talk about the role. You may have to manage their volume of talking a little bit.
No problem.
But they're great. That
particular one's in just over 2 weeks, isn't it?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Encourage anybody that watches this to join us on that session. That's great. Really like that session, Ollie. Thanks ever so much.